Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a very large selection of haunted houses on our tour, so get comfortable, subscribe and let the darkness take control. I live in a small abode down on the Kansas-Missouri border. My story is about an abandoned house that changed my opinion on ghosts. The house is a pink two-story home that's been abandoned for 20 plus years next to my father's house. The backstory is pretty crazy too. This mother that lived there hung her child out of the window on the top floor, then took her own life via firearm in the head. Well, since then the house has been in probate and nobody would buy it from the bank. Like I said, it's a small town. We have little funds, so we just let the houses stay the way they are. My dad used to tell me about this house, having bubonic plague, so we didn't go there. But shortly after I realized that it wasn't the case. Me and a few friends decided to go into the house to explore, and we didn't find anything too crazy for a long time, but we dared not go upstairs. Around the time I turned 14, I decided I wanted to go upstairs for the first time. I just didn't want to go alone. Who can blame me? So a friend and I went up the stairs to find a crap of letters laying around all over the floor. Some dated back to the 1980s, but nothing creepy in particular. But the odd thing is, they led kind of to a trail to a little miniature closet. Me and my friend tried to avoid looking at it, as we didn't really want to. So us, being the little hoodlums we were, decided we wanted to start breaking things in the house, finding ourselves humorous. Then we broke a certain doll, and things got weird. We started to hear something swaying from the window, so we decided to check it out. When we looked, there was nothing there. We thought it was pretty weird. Was it perhaps the ghost of one of the kids? Later on, we decided we were hungry and wanted to go home to eat. Maybe 2 weeks passed and my friend and I decided we wanted to hang in the house again and maybe read some of the letters or discover what else we could find to entertain ourselves. Well, this is the part where things started to get really weird. We were just sitting there on a desk talking to each other, reading the letters, when all of a sudden the little closet door began creeping open by itself. I look at my friend with a puzzled expression on my face and asked him if he did something to mess with me. He swore up and down that he had nothing to do with it, but I didn't believe him, so I went to investigate. And in the closet was the exact same doll we broke, but the doll wasn't broken. So we went to the area where we broke the doll to find there was no trace of us even breaking it. Not a shard of porcelain could be found on the floor. We went back to the closet and the door was closed again, and when we opened it, the doll was gone. We knew we had to get out of there, so we ran back to my dad's and hopped the fence separating the properties. We didn't go back for maybe 3 months when curiosity piqued again. This time when we returned, I brought my own doll to see if it would be affected, but sadly it wasn't. The doll we saw was nowhere to be found, and by this time the house had already been damaged a lot due to weather. But that didn't stop us. We decided we wanted to go back upstairs where most of the damage occurred. The roof collapsed and took some of the floor with it on its way down to the first floor, so the closet was kind of stuck open at this point. We turned on our phones and played rock, paper, scissors to see who was going into the closet. I lost, so as I'm getting down on my hands and knees to crawl in, I heard a little kid's voice, unclear of what he said, coming from the closet. It kind of sounded like, "Wanna play hide and seek?" But it was deeply mumbled. It creeps me out to this day and gives me chills just recounting this. But here I am, 20 years old, with the story to share. Needless to say, we never went back to the house again. I grew up in rural Missouri, up in the northeast corner, not far from Iowa or Illinois, and on the banks of the Mississippi River. Our town played a part in the Underground Railroad, and many of the homes were quite historic. Well, in 1993 there was the Great Flood, and the home my mum and stepdad and I lived in was underwater. My parents worked across the river in Illinois, and I didn't want to switch schools, so they let me stay with the town librarian who lived up the hill. This was because I was a bookworm and spent every evening and summers at the library. It was very small, and I was very close with a librarian called Marge. She and her husband lived in a very old brick home. The house was not in the best of shapes, but they were working on it. All the bookshelves from the library were in the foyer and dining room. They had to move them in as the library was also underwater. The home was 3 stories. I was given the main floor tour, then taken to the second floor where the bedrooms were. Marge pointed towards the stairs going up to the 3rd floor and told me to stay out of there and that it wasn't safe. I kind of scrunched my face, wondering what that meant as I was 9 at the time. They took me down the hall and showed me where they slept, and I was at the end of the hall. I had a window facing the road and one facing the neighbors. My antique iron-framed bed was head against the neighbor's window, and I would face an old wardrobe. Outside the home was a very large old tree. The tree had an opening that was filled with cinder blocks. I'd asked about it before, and was told that they hid slaves in there, but they filled it so kids wouldn't play in it. The rest of the evening went as anyone would guess. I don't really remember, but when the night fell, I was sent to bed. That's when some interesting things came about. I tossed and turned for a while. I didn't like going to bed early, and the bed wasn't as comfortable as the one I had. I tried forcing myself to sleep, but then I started hearing someone hammering. It sounded like metal on metal. I had no idea what was going on. It was well past 10 at this point. I got up and looked down the hall and it was quiet. I tried looking out the window facing the neighbor, but it was that glass like in the bathroom that made everything fuzzy. I assumed it was the neighbor making noise, so I laid back down, trying to ignore that noise. A while later, I heard footsteps overhead and something dragging. Yes, that sounds like a cartoon or movie, but I'm serious. I was shaking in my jammies and went back to the hall, looking down to see if anyone was there. I tried yelling in a whisper for Marge, but got no reply. I ended up running down to her bedroom and woke her up. She was of course concerned, and she told me it was okay. The house made noises and I just wasn't used to it. She took me back to bed and tucked me in nice and neat. I was trying not to cry, but I did as she said and tried to go back to sleep. More time passed and I wasn't fully asleep. I could feel myself being watched. I covered my head and forced myself to keep my eyes closed and thinking about sleep. But I couldn't take it. I took a peek from under the sheets, and it was at that moment I saw a lady from what appeared to be the Victorian era. I yelled and screamed, ran out of the room and woke up Marge again, begging for her to call my grandpa to collect me. She tried settling me down, but it wasn't happening, and I was scared more than I'd ever been before. Fortunately, I was able to get my grandpa to answer the phone at 3 a.m. He lived a half hour away, and he came to rescue me. I'll never forget my hero who saved me from that haunted house. I used to work for a small remodeling company about 15 years ago. One particular job stands out. We were making some updates to a large ranch home in an upscale neighborhood of St. Louis when my boss and I received a visitor. We were both working in the dining room when we distinctly heard the screen door in the garage swing open, with the common sound of the wooden screen door springs stretching and then the screen door slamming shut. The sound of the door was followed by footsteps through the kitchen and moving down the hall. This particular ranch home was the 3-bedroom, 2-bath variety with an eating kitchen, formal dining room, front entrance, foyer, living room, family room with a fireplace, and the basement was partially finished with a game room at the far end. It had a side entry 2-car garage, and the house was divided in half with a load-bearing wall, with the kitchen being on the opposite side of this wall from the dining room. The dining room was also separated from the kitchen by a solid wood door that swung in both directions and also shared a half wall with the front foyer. So we heard the screen door open and close and footsteps move through the house when the boss says, "That must be William here to select paint colors for the bedrooms." So my boss proceeds through the door into the kitchen and down the hall calling out for William. He calls out to him several times with no answer. When he approaches me at the half wall by the foyer and asks me if I saw anyone leave through the front door. I told him I hadn't. I had been in one spot wiring a new light and hadn't moved. He asked if I had heard someone come into the house, which I agreed that I had. And he answers, "Man, there's no one here." We decided at that moment to break for lunch, and while setting up to eat in the garage, William arrived in his car with a few paint swatches. This is one of two experiences I had in this house, and I was alone for the second. This was when I was steaming wallpaper off a wall in the breakfast nook of the kitchen, when there were suddenly 3 loud bangs from the basement, which I could feel through my feet. It felt like someone banging directly onto the floor jolted from below me. I heard it a second time and mocked the sound by stomping my feet on the floor 3 times. When I stomped my feet, it was answered immediately by 3 more bangs from below my feet. Even though I was feeling rather tense, I decided to go downstairs and look, and saw nothing. It was a neat basement, although you had to walk a few feet in the dark before you reached the first light, which was turned on by a pull chain. Immediately below where I had been on the main floor was the laundry area, a short walk away from the room, which had a built-in storage for pool cues and billiard balls, and on the floor was a layout for shuffleboard. I loved working on old houses and loved their history, but I never encountered anything like this until then, and hope I never do again. This happened to me in 2001 when I was 13. The foster family I had just moved into was selling one of 2 old people homes they owned. This particular one just so happened to supposedly be placed on the boundary lines of the old Templar kingdom of Walsingham, as it was located in a rough area of Leeds, Yorkshire. After all residents were moved to different care homes, staff laid off before the sale completed and money changed hands, my then foster mother, her ex-care home manager friend, and myself decided to spend the night to make sure all the cleaning was done, all items/knickknacks removed by removals, and no damage to property, etc. The initial plan was to sleep in a camp bed in the living room, my foster mother and her friend to sleep in a nearby ground floor room. Upon pulling into the driveway, I can only explain that I got bad vibes off the place. It was mid-October, early evening darkness. I got out of the car, and upon walking up to the front door, I can only explain it as seeing a black cloud amalgamation of moving darkness through the living room window correlating in the left-hand corner of the room. This furthering my bad vibes, I stuck closer to foster mother and her friend as we did all the basic chores before bed. As the room they were sleeping in had twin beds and was quite big, I asked if I could sleep on the floor so as not be on my own, and surprisingly they agreed. TV on until time to sleep, my foster mother and her friend were fast asleep. I was drifting into sleep. I wasn't sure what time it was when I was on my left side, my right ear on the pillow, left ear up, and I heard as though it was directly in my left ear, a few seconds of loud sniffling, and I could feel the breath on my ear. As I opened my eyes slowly, it was then I heard the most loud, inhuman, blood-curdling scream of a woman, and then silence. My eyes opened and I jolted up, terrified. What was 30 seconds looking at both my foster mother and her friend, who were sound asleep. I screamed loudly, and my foster mother and her friend woke up to me in tears explaining the scream, and they did their best to console me and said to go back to bed and that we'd speak about it in the morning. I couldn't get back to sleep. All I could do was try and rationalize it, yet I could hear a faint clanging sound coming from the floor beneath the floorboards. The next morning, during last-minute chores and waiting for removals, they listened intently and tried to rationalize and tried to make light of the ordeal while consoling me. Eventually they tried to make a joke of it, as they knew by how I looked I was telling the truth. Apparently other staff members had heard the same thing during the time that it had been a care home. I discovered that a rich family bought the place, and it was to be used as a family home. And remember that 2 weeks after this ordeal, calming down, I asked if the new owners were told it was haunted. I got a grin, and a maybe. If anyone lived in an ex-care home in Leeds, UK once called Walsingham, a big old house, and had the scare of a lifetime, all I can say is I'm sorry. This is a story about a girl from another school I knew. Her parents worked with ambassadors, and that required them to move around a lot. They tend to buy cheap places that they can resell easily and when they leave. And once this girl was 11, they bought this big old gorgeous house really cheap and they never saw that red flag. The girl was the youngest of 4 siblings, and her 3 older brothers are either in college or have jobs already. When they moved in, things started disappearing from her room and showing up in the attic, garage or kitchen, which was strange. Even her mum's engagement ring vanished one day, and while her mum was alone in the house, the ring came bouncing out of nowhere and hit her on the head. It was just strange, until one night it got worse. Her room had a big mirror on the wall next to her bed, and while she was out sleeping on her side, she saw a little girl with a crooked neck in the back of the mirror and freaked the hell out. This happened frequently until it got too heavy for anyone to sustain, and they decided to sell the house. One of the old neighbors came to them one day and said no one would ever buy the damned house because it had the ghost of a girl that had taken her own life in the 50s. This next story is about another classmate. For some reason there is a ghost town in the outskirts of the city where Satanists go to perform blood rituals, and many messed up things still happen today. To go there, there's a deviation on the road that you take and just drive until you hit many brick walls with pentagrams and Bahamut drawings on them. Neighbouring that town are many beautiful houses owned by rich people, and my classmate lived in one of those. He said that before midnight everyone had to lock their doors or they would run into the ghosts that roamed the house. They tried to open the doors, making them rattle and bang against the wall. He was used to it, but one night he was coming home from a party at 1 a.m. The car broke down on the intersection and he came out of the car to fix his old ass engine and left the door open. He went back to the car and noticed there was someone behind him in the back seat and looked at the rearview mirror and saw an old man that shook. He thought it was a hobo, but when he turned around to confront him, he was already gone. He could even hear him breathing loudly, as he was ill, and saw him in the rearview mirror. My final story is about a guy called Roderick in my school. He's 2 years older than me and used to live in this huge house outside of the city. Sometimes Roderick and his little sister had to stay alone at that house because their parents would leave for parties. Their bedrooms were in the 2nd floor, and Roderick would hear banging noises from the 1st. Him being the elder brother, he had to go and check, as they always came from the kitchen, and when he came closer the noise would just go louder and louder until he heard someone running barefoot towards the door. Logically, he just ran into his sister's room and locked the door. He guarded his sister the entire night, and he came to class super tired, which is when I asked him about it and he told me. Thankfully, shortly after, they moved to another city, and I haven't seen them since. We bought a house where the original owner had a stroke in our bedroom. He stayed alive for about a year in the hospital and passed away a few months before we obtained ownership. It was a hell of a process getting the house, but that's another story. First few nights we had some strange things happen. I chalked it up to first-time ownership and not being used to our surroundings. I woke up twice talking to someone, and another morning my husband got up to go to work and he closed our door and went into the kitchen. My dogs were in the mudroom and I 100% heard him let them out. I could hear the tick 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 of their nails sitting the floor and coming down the hallway. Then I heard a growl and I startled and woke up to find the hallway light off and the dogs still in the mudroom. About a week in, I went to my morning job, and when I came home I smelled floral perfume, and my first thought was that the previous owner's daughter must have come into our house. So I called my husband and told him to buy new locks because I was pretty sure that someone came in without asking. But he replied with, "I smelled that when I walked to work at 5 a.m. I froze because I never smelled it when I left for work at around 8. He said it was probably my laundry detergent, but I don't buy floral detergent and it doesn't smell like that. So as years went by, small things would happen. I'd hear bangs, knocking, I'd see shadows from the corner of my eye. I even had our kitchen window open in the middle of winter, and my dog was pushed off the couch and wouldn't go back up there. Outside, a door would constantly be open and it drove me nuts. One day, it would be the shop, one day it would be the barn, another day it would be the garage, and I always have a habit of double-checking doors to make sure they are closed. Recently, I woke up in our office room. Usually I keep it closed because I need darkness when I sleep, and we don't have proper curtains in there and the light just shines in. I did smudge the house and things have quieted down big time, but my husband and I are going through a divorce and I met another guy and started dating him, and there's stuff that goes on in that house too. I smudged that place, and now things are happening outside. I'm pretty convinced that either he or the land is cursed. My husband is in the military and leaves for weeks or months at a time. He was on temporary travel duty and had been gone about 3 weeks at the time. I tucked our girls in and went to bed, read for a bit, made sure the girls were asleep, and then got back into bed. I pulled the blanket up and snuggled in, and felt my husband crawl into bed next to me and hug me, like one of those hugs that are filled with love, protection, and are just the best kind when in bed. I felt so safe and warm. I sort of wallowed in the hug for a moment, until it hit me that no one was in the room with me. I didn't get freaked out though, because it wasn't that scary. Another thing that would happen in that house was seeing a little girl in a white frilly dress from the corner of my eyes, but only when my husband was gone, never when he was home. My girls had strange instances as well. They both played with the little girl, but neither told each other about it, or my husband and I until years later, and my youngest asked me about the blonde neighbor girl that we had that always wore the white dress, as she was 3, 4 and 5 when at this house. My oldest was like, "Yeah, what was her name? She'd play before bedtime a lot and would then go home." Then we moved from the house. I had left my pillow there and ran back to get it. I went upstairs, grabbed it, and then stopped on the landing of the stairs and just stood for a moment and then said, "Bye, house," because you could feel it there, and a second later I felt like something wanted to push me down the stairs, so I booked it. I didn't say anything to anyone, because I just thought I was crazy. My husband went a week later to take all the final garbage out, and stepped on the landing as well and looked around, then said the same thing. He felt like he was going to get pushed down the stairs, only he flew home and told me he didn't care if he seemed crazy or not. That's when we started talking about the weird stuff that would happen, but never connected it to it being haunted. Other little things included going into the basement at night, and you'd feel overcome with an unnatural feeling of utter dread. We only did the laundry during the day. The cats would stare at spots that had nothing in them and puff up for no reason. I live in a house I grew up in and inherited. My grandfather died upstairs in one of the 2 bedrooms up there in what is now a glamour room, when I was around 8 years old. I remember being very afraid of him. Then about 4 years ago I found my dad passed away after doing a wellness check on him downstairs in the dining room. That was when I completely renovated the house with the intent to sell, but after seeing its nice new facelift I couldn't let go of it and moved in. I noticed spikes of activity. I've never believed in spirits or the paranormal and rely on facts and science to prove things, but some of this stuff along with major events have stumped me now, and I just had to settle on the thought that the energy from my father got tripled in a loop downstairs, and upstairs I'm still unsure of, but I do believe activity relating to the upstairs versus the downstairs are different, and came from the death of the people who died on that story of the house. These spikes of activity, I noticed things happen gradually, with an increase in severity, starting small and then becoming major activity events, over the course of about 3 months, and then everything goes away for about 6 months. The major activity event has caused me to reach out to people to do a ghost hunter-esque type thing on the house, but by the time I heard back from them, I noticed everything stopped, so I'd leave it alone. We're currently in an active phase. But anyway, let me explain the different events now. So small activity examples. One very common small thing is I will be cooking in the kitchen next to the dining room, and I'll set down mixing bowls, like a ladle, and I'll turn around to do prep, meat on the counter, and when I go to grab it, it's gone. This makes me feel like I'm insane. I spent hours searching the entire house and all the cabinets and drawers before turning around again after finally being like, well, never mind where it went, and going back to cooking when it's back in its original position. This small event made me check that my carbon monoxide detector was still working. Another one is sounds of static with talking, like a walkie-talkie from behind my headboard. The wall is against the dining room where my father died, and both me and my ex-husband heard it. While we were laying down to sleep with everything off, I knew my father died with the stereo on playing his music, which he kept in the dining room against the wall my headboard's on. I researched things and read some crazy stuff about how an overheated fan can turn on and pick up radio signals. I've also chalked it up to that. Another strange thing has been my TV turning on by itself at around 2 or 3 a.m. and waking me up to my current fiancé. The volume is always turned to max 100 when this happens, and it scares us awake. We don't watch TV in that volume, and this has happened 2 to 3 times now. We also have our living room lights. There are 2 that are built in a very high ceiling that turns on both with one switch, and lately when we've been watching TV and turn them off, one of them will be on by itself. Only when we are sitting there though. This has never happened when we turned off the light or go to bed, but it will repeatedly happen while we sit there. I had an electrician come to check for a short and check the wiring, and he found nothing wrong. Footsteps running and walking upstairs that will go to our loft from the glamour room, as it's a very obvious sound. These are the rooms my grandfather would be in. This would be very relevant for a major activity event. Another thing upstairs is when I'm in the glamour room I constantly hear a phone vibrating like it's ringing, and then it stops. There's a door to the attic from that closet that also connects to the garage, but I've checked for phones, and no one had a phone on them when they died. I keep my dad's ashes and cell phone in that closet, but his phone long died and doesn't turn on. The first big thing that happened was 6 months after I moved in, and the disappearing kitchen stuff started then, the next week or so. After about 3 nights that my now ex-husband and I were laying in bed and trying to sleep, something pounded on the kitchen sliding glass door with 3 loud bangs. We both shot up in bed and he grabbed a baseball bat, and we went to go and have a look around. It sounded like someone was trying to break in. We have ring cameras installed around the whole house that alert us to any and all activity, and we checked those and there was no motion in the backyard. And you could clearly see the patio door when the sound occurred, and there being nothing there. When we investigated the door, there was a handprint, like if you were to press your face up against the glass and your breath fogs it and leaves an imprint. So we went to bed the next day and investigated how the noise happened. I had him pound on the door the same way from the outside, opened the handle and closed it, same from the inside. The sounds were completely different, and we both immediately could hear the sound was on a flat, open hand but came from inside. I could only come up with that the energy trapped from my dad's last day or routine or something is what all of this could have been. The next major event was about 6 months later, after a string of smaller activity things, mostly the footsteps and upstairs stuff like the phone vibrating. One night around 2, I was woken up to what sounded like running around upstairs. My son was 2 or 3 at the time, and his room is across from my glamour room, So I got up, in full mum mode, ready to go catch his little butt and put him back to bed. I go upstairs and open his door and he's sound asleep. So I freak out a bit and decide to slowly turn around and open the glamour door. And I will never forget this as long as I live. When I opened the door, everything was dark from the lights being off. But the closet, that's in the room directly across from the entrance door, I swear on my life there was a little red light. Like from a recording camera, and I heard a phone notification go off, like the old school Jurassic Park phone notification. I slammed that door shut, grabbed my son, wake up my ex-husband and have him investigate. No one. At this point I'm convinced we have a squatter in our attic, so I have him drill the freaking access door shut to the attic. The next day we investigate, and there's no one in there nor signs of anyone. We set off our Ring cameras to access the garage if broken in, and got up there. But once I drilled that door shut, it all stopped. All the phone vibrating up there along with the footsteps. So the last major event, that's not that major compared to these other two, is that late at night, my organizer, which holds all my over-the-counter medication in my pantry, which is on a shelf against the wall, and has a solid 2 inches of shelf in front of it. It's not hanging off, somehow completely pushed itself off the shelf in the middle of the night. It woke up my new fiancé and I. This was about a week after the lights and the TV turning off event. So there it is. I've contacted ghost hunter types, but the activity will go away and then return. Is there anything I can do? What can you recommend for a situation like this? My friend's family lived in a 100-plus-year-old farmhouse out in the country that was haunted, but they all treated it like it was completely normal. I've never been one to believe in the paranormal, and since my friend was always a good one for pranks and duping me, I wasn't buying it when he told me it was haunted. He told me some of the commonplace things that would happen all the time to him and his family, like objects moving randomly, cabinet doors opening unassisted, and the feeling that someone was just on the edge of your peripheral vision, but that when you turned to look, no one was there. Inexplicable cold breezes when windows weren't open, those sorts of things. I experienced a few things like that when we hung out there, but they were easy to dismiss as something explainable, so I didn't fully believe the house was haunted. I didn't mind hanging out there, but there was an odd vibe to the house that I really can't describe. Because I was skeptical, and he kept insisting strange things happening in the house, I wanted to throw him under the bus and got brave enough one time to ask his mum about the hauntings right in front of him. I thought she would downplay it all or tell me he was full of BS, but she sort of shrugged it and said they'd all gotten used to it and the occurrences were always harmless. That wasn't the response I expected, but it did let me become a bit less skeptical. I finally accepted the hauntings were real when one of the last times I stayed at his house before they moved. In the kitchen there was a door with a hook latch that led down to the basement/crawl space where they kept all the things they pickled and canned. The house was old, so the wall that the door was on had a noticeable lean, which meant the door could only rest in the shut position or be completely open against the wall. If you held it straight out, it would either slam shut or slam against the wall. It was late one night, and we were up playing Halo on Xbox after his parents had gone to bed. In the midst of playing, he stopped and said, "Look, look, look," while nodding towards the kitchen. I could faintly hear the latch come undone, and turned my head just in time to watch that basement door slowly open past the midpoint, then slam against the wall, as if someone had just let it go. It didn't faze my friend in the slightest, and he got right back to the game after it happened. Since I was immersed in the game as well, I didn't really take the time to acknowledge what happened. I remember going upstairs to sleep that night and lying awake, trying to make sense of what I saw. Partly thinking of a logical explanation, partly scared because I'd never witnessed anything like it before. That was back when we were in middle school, and now we're in our mid-30s. I attend a research university and pride myself on being a critical thinker, trusting empirical knowledge and making sense of the world around me with an evidence-based approach. But to this day, I cannot explain how that door opening would be possible without assistance. I know, it was just a door opening 20 years ago. There are hundreds if not thousands of paranormal videos of doors inexplicably opening, and largely I have a hard time believing them. But yet, when I think about my own experience, I am convinced that something paranormal made it happen. This was around 2 years ago. I had a summer job in a greenhouse which started at around 5 AM because by 11 the greenhouse was unworkable due to the heat. I live in a town of about 20,000 people, so it's modern but has old-fashioned elderly. When I woke up I felt very awake and was not tired whatsoever. When I was biking to work, there was an interesting figure biking towards me in the distance. She was on a cargo bike, basically a wheelbarrow on the front of the bike. The cargo part of the cargo bike was made of wood and looked old. She was wearing old-fashioned clothes, which I saw sometimes but rare, especially at 6:30 AM, so she had my attention. When she got close to me, I saw her face, or what should have been. She had old grey hair, red and white headcloth and an old jacket on. Her skin was very pale, but I couldn't really make out her face. It almost appeared like she had no eyes, no nose or mouth, and she just kept on pedaling. I looked at her for a good 5 seconds close up. She never even acknowledged me. It scared the crap out of me, and no one ever believed me. When I looked back, after she passed me, she had vanished. I have no explanation for what I saw, and didn't really like going out that early in the morning, because I really didn't want to see her again. I lived with my grandparents for a bit, and I'm convinced their house is haunted. Multiple times I would see someone walking past my doorway, as I had a basement room in a partially finished basement, and would think it was my grandma until I remembered I was home alone. Also, the person never went up the stairs, always just down the stairs, and never made a sound. But there would be a silhouette of a person passing the doorway and a shadow across the wall from the thing crossing in front of the window. I kept the door closed when I was in my room after a while. One time my sisters slept over and one of them was sleeping in my bed, and my other sister and I were going to creep her out by making grudge noises from the doorway. When the shadow went by, we both jerked upright and looked around because we were the only ones in the area. So we went to the window to see if one of us had made the shadow based off the lighting, but we couldn't replicate it. We were discussing alternatives for how it could have happened when the shadow passed again. My sister and I both shut the door after that. My door would open and close on its own, but randomly it would just open, and when I wake up my door would be wide open, or if I was grabbing something quick, I'd turn around and the door would be closed, and I was purposefully trying to leave it open so I could leave as quickly as possible. One time I was home alone for the weekend and hiding in my room when I heard a loud crash, so I snuck upstairs to investigate, and there was a picture in the middle of the hallway. It had fallen out of the guest room upstairs. Two things wrong with this is the notch in the back was the type where you have to lift it off the nail that was still in the wall, and where the picture had landed wasn't possible, even if it just fallen off the wall, because it had to go around a corner to make it to the hallway, and there was only one crash so it didn't bounce out there. Whatever's always seemed more playful than malicious, but it's left me curious. I was about 18 and had moved out of home. Coincidentally, my friend had moved into the house next door to my mum. My friend had a house party like he did most weekends. The night had drawn to a close, and with nowhere to sleep, I decided to crash at my mum's place. No one was home, but I had a set of keys and let myself in. I got settled into one of the rooms after about 10 minutes, and I could hear someone breathing at the end of the bed. I was very drunk and decided to ignore it. The next day my family came home, and I told them about how drunk I was and that it sounded like someone was breathing in the room, to which my mum relayed that she had heard it too, and had a medium check the room. The medium confirmed there was an old man at the end of the bed. He wasn't sinister, and enjoyed relaxing in that particular spot. This left me disturbed beyond words. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to extend a huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their financial contributions to help the channel keep running. It really does mean a lot, so thank you. For now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.